everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Alex and today I am bringing you my favorite books of 2019. Now I know a lot of people have already posted their favorite books of 2019 videos, but honestly it took me a while to narrow it down to an acceptable number. I read 148 or 149 books in the year of 2019 and I gave 40 of those books 5 stars. So it was really hard for me to narrow down my absolute favorites of the year, but I wound up narrowing it down to 16 books. I couldn't get it to a nice rounded number, but that's okay. But today we're going to be talking about my top 16 books that I read in 2019. Before we get into the video, if you're new here and you're not already, be sure to go down and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell icon down below so that you never miss out on any of my content. And without further ado, let's get started. So these books are going to be in no particular order except for the last two. I'm going to save my favorite 2 books of the year for the very end of the video. And before we get there, drop a comment down below and see if you can predict what they are. So the first book that I want to discuss today is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book follows our main character, Evelyn Hugo, who was a Hollywood starlet back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and since her acting career ended, she has pretty much been a recluse. She has never done anything since then. She has never taken on any interviews or anything like that. Well, in the present day, we follow Monique, who is an up-and-coming writer, reporter, journalist, and she kind of feels stuck in her career. It's not really going anywhere, and all of a sudden, randomly, Evelyn Hugo calls on Monique to write her biography, and Monique thinks that this might be the big break in her career. So the majority of the book is following Evelyn Hugo's life. We get to see her becoming a star, and the main question that everybody has wanted to know, Evelyn Hugo married 7 men throughout her lifetime, and everybody wants to know who was Evelyn's one true love. Now, this is one that was on a ton of people's favorites for 2018. I didn't read it until January 2019, and I highly enjoyed this one, just like I knew that I would. This is the first book that I ever read by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and it just completely captivated me. Evelyn Hugo is just a badass, strong woman that she makes some really awesome decisions that you want to root for her, and she deals with some crap, man, and she just does it like a badass. But she is still a flawed character. There are decisions that she makes throughout the novel that I really didn't agree with. I still wanted to root for her, but I thought that she was in the wrong some of the time. And characters like that, they're that dynamic, are what really pull me into a story. So this has to be on my top of the year. I absolutely adored it. If you haven't read it yet, what are you doing? Please give it a try. The next book I want to talk about is Falling Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. Now this is a high fantasy novel that takes place in this world. There was magic a long time ago, but it has long since been forgotten, and this world has been living through centuries and centuries of peace, but now there is some unrest starting to come about. We follow 4 main players throughout the novel, and we just get to essentially watch the politics and the magic unfold in this world. Now, this is another one that I read way back in the beginning of 2019. I read this one back in March, and I don't remember a whole lot of the details of it, but I just remember being blown away at how well crafted this world was. If I had to compare this to another series, I haven't read these books, but I would peg this as Game of Thrones for YA. It is so intricate, and the history of this world is so rich and well done and well thought out, and these characters play so well together, and there are some that you root for and some that you hate and some that you love to hate. It was so well done. And I know this is a 6-book series. I 100% am going to be continuing this series into 2020. Honestly, cannot believe that I haven't done it yet. This is an older title though. It's a little bit more backlist. So if you are into YA fantasy and you want something high fantasy, please give this one a try. If you haven't already, it totally blew me away. Next book I want to talk about is This Is How It Always Is by Lori Frankel. Now this novel follows our characters Rosie and Penn, who are a married couple, and they are the parents of 5 boys. And they have always wanted a girl, but when they get pregnant for the last time and they discover that it's a boy, you know, they're really happy, they're excited, and that's what they know how to do. They're excited to be raising another boy. But the story really kicks off when Claude is 5 years old and he comes to his parents and says that he is not actually Claude, he is Poppy. The story really just kicks off from there, and it's a really hard-hitting, character-driven contemporary that just pulls at every single one of your heartstrings. Now, the thing that really shines in this novel is the characters. There is definitely a plot behind this, so if you like a plot-driven novel as opposed to character-driven, but you want to dive more into character-driven, I think that this is a really good one to go with, because there's definitely a plot that moves through, and there are certain events that happen, but we are mainly following the characters. And I really enjoyed that the story, of course, is focusing on Poppy and everything that she's going through, but we get to hear a lot from Poppy's brothers and her parents on how they are dealing with the situation as well. Now, a lot of this novel is really heartbreaking because it is hard to watch the things that Poppy has to go through and the people that don't understand her or don't approve of her. And it's hard to watch Rosie and Penn try to do the best that they can for their daughter in a world that doesn't understand her. But the novel really gives you a sense of hope at the end, and I just remember being so emotionally attached to these characters and just wanting the best for every single one of them. So if that's something that you're looking for and you like hard-hitting contemporaries and you want something with a diverse element, this is definitely one that I would recommend. Another hard-hitting contemporary that I want to talk about is The Nowhere Girls by Amy Reed. Now, The Nowhere Girl starts out with our main character, Grace, and she has just moved from her hometown in Kentucky up to Oregon. Now, the house that Grace has just moved into used to be occupied by a girl named Lucy, and Grace comes to find out that Lucy had accused a few of the boys at their school of rape, and essentially nobody believed her, and they kind of shunned her, so Lucy and her family moved away, and nobody has heard from them since. So Grace teams up with two of her classmates, Rosina and Erin, and they form this group called the Nowhere Girls. And all of these girls are getting together, talking about their own experiences and their struggles, and trying to put a spotlight on what is happening and what these boys are doing, and trying to get somebody to listen to them and get the justice that they deserve. Now, this is one that I went in with not low expectations, but really just no expectations at all. I'd heard a couple things from a couple people and they seemed to enjoy it, but I didn't think that it was going to impact me as much as it did. There is so much that's covered in this book, and I always say this when I talk about this novel, but there are so many things in here that you would think that the novel would feel bogged down or preachy, and it completely does not. Everything in this novel is put in at the perfect time, in the perfect way, in the perfect amount. It's just so well done. We also get a ton of diversity in this novel. All three of our main characters are diverse. We've got mental illness, we've got fat representation. We talk a lot about politics and faith in the novel. We have a queer character, we have an immigrant, we have everything that you could think of is in this novel. So whatever kind of diversity you're looking for, I bet that you could find it in here. So again, this is another hard-hitting contemporary that really left me feeling empowered and hopeful at the end, and I don't think that this one gets the attention that it deserves. So moving back into fantasy, another one I have to mention is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Now, this novel takes place in a world where there is magic based around color. So the more powerful you are, the more colors you can see, and you can, I don't remember exactly if you can manipulate the colors, but regardless, the magic system in this is really cool. But our main plot follows two sisters who are princesses. They have grown up in the palace, and what they have always been told is that the older sister is going to be married off to this god king that is the ruler of the next realm, and the younger sister is going to stay home and fulfill the duties that she has been raised to do. Well, their father, the king, when it comes time for the older daughter to be married off, he decides that he simply cannot bear to let her go, let her leave, so he winds up waiting until the younger daughter comes of age, and at the very last minute, he switches their roles. So now the older daughter is to stay home with her father, and the younger daughter is going to be married off to the god king. From there, we follow these two sisters trying to navigate their new roles. They've been preparing their entire lives for something, and now neither of them get what they were born to do, and there's a ton of magic, a ton of political intrigue, and just everything that you would expect from a Brandon Sanderson novel. This is the only fantasy that I have read from Brandon Sanderson. I've read some of his sci-fi works, but this is the only fantasy, and I 100% understand why he is such an authority in the adult high fantasy space, because this was freaking good. Well, it's long. It's like 700 pages long, but it reads so quickly. It's so well developed. It's so well paced. It never feels bogged down. You get to follow every single one of the characters. And sometimes when I read a novel that has multiple perspectives or follows a ton of different characters, there are certain characters that I don't care to read about, and I'm just kind of skimming their parts to get to the people that I care about. Now with this one, I cared about every single character, and I needed to know exactly what was happening. The twists and turns were so cool. The magic was there. The battle scenes were awesome. Just everything about this novel was so good. Now there is going to be a sequel. I just got on Goodreads and it has a name, which it didn't the last time that I looked at it, but it's going to be called Nightblood, and I'm really excited for it, but it's not going to come out for a while. I know that Brandon Sanderson is trying to finish up Elantris and Wax and Wayne before he even looks at this one, so it's going to be a while. I'll have time to reread it, but regardless, if you are looking for adult high fantasy, this one is here and it's so good. On a much lighter note, I want to talk about The Unnie Mooners by Christina Lauren. This novel follows our main character, Olive, and at the beginning of the novel, her sister is getting married. Well, Olive, who is the maid of honor, and the best man at the wedding named Ethan absolutely despise each other. They've hated each other for a long, long time, and they don't ever want to be around each other at all. Well, at the wedding, at the reception, everybody except for Olive and Ethan winds up getting food poisoning. And Amy, Olive's sister, cannot go on her non-refundable honeymoon because she is sick. So she offers the honeymoon up to Olive and Ethan, but they are gonna have to pretend to be married to be able to pull this off and get this free honeymoon vacation to Hawaii. This ends up turning into a hate to love romance that is just the cutest and softest shit that I have ever read in my entire life. I listened to this novel on audiobook, but I think even if you read it in the print format, it reads like a rom-com movie. It goes fast, it is adorable, it is well paced, the characters. This is one of the best hate to love romances that I have ever laid my eyes on. It is precious and adorable. And what I really enjoyed, and what I enjoy about Christina Lauren's works in general, obviously Christina Lauren writes love stories, so there's gonna be a big romance, but our characters also have more to them than just the romance. So I thought that the characters were really well developed in this, and they get into some trouble, and it's hilarious, and I loved everything about this. This is one that if you need just a pick-me-up and you want something that you can read in a weekend and it just makes you feel good, pick this one up. It is fantastic. I also have to talk about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. Now, this novel follows our main character, April May, and she lives in New York City. One day, she's walking through the city at 3 o'clock in the morning and stumbles upon this robot statue type thing that she calls Carl. She winds up making a video with it, and it goes viral overnight because there are all kinds of these Carls popping up all over the world. Nobody knows how they got there. Nobody has any idea about them. And it winds up just becoming this wild ride, and April May finds herself randomly in the spotlight, and she has to learn how to deal with this viral social media fame, and it just is so good. Now, this is a novel, and I've said this every time that I talk about this, but it was so well written that it's hard for me to even believe that this is a debut. I expected really good things going into this. I will admit I had pretty high expectations going in, but I was even blown away past what I even thought it was going to be. It was written so well. The characters are really, really well developed, and I appreciated this novel a lot because the main character is 23 years old, and I feel like that is a age range that we don't really see a lot. Like 20 to 24, nobody really talks about those ages. Even like 19 to 24, you either get 18 and below for YA or 25 and up for adult, but that middle section of like new adult, it is a genre, but honestly, a lot of what I found is just smut. And I like this novel where we get to see a character in their early to mid 20s who's just trying to figure life out. And that's what this was, and it was so good. The writing style was exactly what I like. It's where it's straightforward. There's not a whole lot of flowery writing, but it's a little bit quirky, just enough to give it something, and I loved it. It was exactly what I wanted it to be. I will also say April May in this novel is bisexual. The bisexual representation in this novel is great. I loved how it was handled. I felt really seen, and I think that if you were looking for bisexual representation, this is one to go look at. I also definitely thought that the commentary that was presented on social media and social media fame, viral fame, internet fame, is really thought-provoking and intriguing, and it's something that I don't feel like we've gotten a lot of literature around yet because it is a new concept. Within just the last 10 years, this concept has arisen, and this is a really good example of some commentary on that. So if you are looking for an interesting story with a little bit more something else that actually applies to our real life, this is a really nice balance. I also know that the sequel is coming out in July of 2020. Cannot wait. One of my most anticipated releases of the year. My favorite historical fiction of the year was The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Now, I did also read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna this year, and let me tell you, I enjoyed The Great Alone more than I enjoyed The Nightingale. This novel is set in 1974, and it follows our main character, Lenny, who her father has just come back from the Vietnam War, and he has a really severe PTSD from that experience, and he wants a new start, wants a fresh place to go, so he decides to move his family up to Alaska to just try to start over. Well, Lenny is having a really difficult time in this transition. Her father is not the best man in the world. world. And as the Alaskan winters start to come and things start to get darker and darker, their home life becomes darker and darker, and it goes from there. Now, this novel starts out when Lenny is 13, and it follows her all the way through her adolescence up into adulthood. I do not recommend this novel for kids. I would probably say no younger than 16, definitely, and only if you have a very, very mature 16-year-old would I say to put this into their hands. This is an adult book. Even though it follows a child for some of the book, this is an adult book. There are graphic scenes of abuse. There are just really adult elements and some big triggers that I think you need to be aware of going into this novel. But if you are able to handle those things, this is a really hard-hitting exploration of that. This is one of those novels. I listened to it mostly on audiobook, going back and forth between that and the ebook. And this is one of those novels that I kept trying to find things to do around the house so that I could listen. Or like I would go to the gym so that I could listen while I was driving and while I was there. It was one that I did not want to put it down. I needed to know what happened to our characters. I got so attached to Lenny and her story and all the other characters throughout the novel. Even the side characters in this novel completely shined. It was beautifully done. If you need a historical fiction that's not set in World War II and you haven't tried this one out yet, please give it a go. It was so good. Like I said, it's really hard hitting, but if you can handle it, it is definitely worth the read. On a much lighter note, we have The Bookish Life of Nina Hill by Abby Waxman. So we follow our main character, Nina Hill, who is the only child of a single mother, and she has grown up now, she's an adult, and she has her life exactly the way that she likes it. She lives alone with her cat, she has a very quiet life, she goes to trivia with her friends once a week, she works at a bookstore, she knows exactly how she likes things, and she is just her own person. Well, one day she comes to find out that the father that she never knew has suddenly passed away, and she actually has this whole other side of the family that she didn't even know about, and they live not too far away. So now Nina is having to meet all these people that she is related to and never even knew existed, and they turn her life upside down. Now, I will admit, a lot of people think that this book is a little bit cheesy, and yeah, I think that it is. To be completely honest, it's pretty cheesy, but I am a sucker for that. I love cheesy novels, and I love that beloved curmudgeon kind of character. Think of like Uwe from A Man Called Uwe, and What I Have Heard About Eleanor from Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. If you liked those novels and you haven't picked this one up yet, it feels like that. So I think that you will really enjoy that element of it. And the cheesiness to me just added to how much I enjoyed it. I thought that this novel was completely adorable, absolutely flew through it. I laughed out loud multiple times, but there was a good mix of the hard-hitting moments and the funny moments. So you get to see Nina just in her natural habitat, and you get to laugh along with her at how kooky she is, but you also get to see her really start to come out of her shell and get to interact with these new members of her family. Now, this is another one that I think has been kind of popular on BookTube for the last year, but not a ton of people have been picking it up. So again, if you need something just like an open letter to book lovers and you haven't picked this one up yet, it's really good. Another historical fiction fantasy novel that I want to talk about is Grace Mercy by Robin Lefevers. This novel is set in 13th or 14th century Brittany, and we follow our main character, 17-year-old Esme, and she winds up running away from a really abusive arranged marriage, and she finds herself in the convent, and she is essentially trained to be a daughter of death. Well, she winds up getting assigned to go into the High Court of Brittany, and she becomes involved in the political goings-on of the court, and she kind of gets in over her head. Now, this is probably my number one most surprising book of 2019. I went into it not really knowing a whole lot, having no expectations at all, really, and it completely blew me out of the water. I was actually a little bit skeptical of this setting because that far back in history is not something that usually appeals to me. But this was done really, really well. This book was addictive. It took me a few chapters to really get into it, probably about 100 pages before I was really, really hooked. But that setup was so important for the rest of the novel. It was so good. Esme is a badass bitch. She was so cool. She stands up for herself. She knows exactly what she wants, and she's gonna go get it. It doesn't matter what you say. She is the best. But there's also a little side romance in here that I absolutely adored, and it was incredible and so cute. But Esme's like, yeah, I want you, but I don't need you. and it was the best. The setting in this was done so well. You can tell that Robin Lefevre did a lot of research on this period in history because it was just so rich and dynamic, and it just pulled you in, completely transported you to that place. There is a ton of political intrigue in here. Again, you can tell that the author spent a lot of time really pulling every string and making it exactly the way that she wanted to, and I cannot wait to see how this series continues. I know that this is an older trilogy, but Robin Lefevre did write another book just in the last couple of years that I'm not sure if it continues the series or if it's a spinoff or if it's something completely different. But regardless, I'm excited to read everything that she's written because this one was so good, and I feel like it's fallen off the radar since it's a little more backlist. So again, if you need YA, historical fiction fantasy, pick it up. Another fantasy favorite of mine in 2019 was Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 6th book in the Throne of Glass series, and I did also read Kingdom of Ash in 2019. I finished out the series, but I will say it was in my contenders for the favorites. It's probably an honorable mention, but Tower of Dawn was my favorite of the two, and it is my favorite book in the Throne of Glass series. Now, I'll be honest, I think that probably part of the reason why I enjoyed this novel so much is because I really did not enjoy Empire of Storms that much, was the 5th book, and I think part of the reason for that is that it did not have Chaol in it. Chaol was a really controversial character, but I adored him, and he was not present in Empire of Storms at all. So that one kind of let me down, really let me down, and Tower of Dawn is all about Chaol, and it was amazing. Now, obviously, since this is the 6th book in a series, I cannot say anything about the plot without having major spoilers, but I think that pretty much everybody has read the Throne of Glass series by now, and like I said, this is my favorite installment. I loved seeing Chaol. I loved the representation in here. I obviously am not an Own Voices reviewer of the representation in this novel, but I enjoyed it, and I liked seeing that element, and I loved just the whole, everything about this novel was so good. This was like peak Sarah J. Maas. I adore everything about Chaol. I feel like his journey, just in this novel alone, was so good and intriguing, and it pulled me in. And this novel honestly reminded me why I loved Throne of Glass in the first place. Because the first 3 novels I really enjoyed. Queen of Shadows was okay. Empire of Storms I really didn't like. So I had a lot riding on Tower of Dawn, and I'm so happy to say that it delivered. If, again, somehow you like fantasy and you haven't read this one yet, you need to pick up this series because it's going to be a YA classic. My favorite mystery thriller of the year was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This novel follows our main character, Rowan, and she is a nanny, and she applies for this nannying job with these 3 young girls that she's going to be taking care of, and they live in this old Victorian house that the parents have redone and essentially made it into a smart home on the inside. Well, we learn at the very beginning of the novel, Rowan is in prison, and she has been accused of killing one of the girls that was in her care, but she is writing letters throughout the novel to this attorney that she wants to represent her, and she is saying, I did not do this. Let me explain to you what actually happened. Let me give you the full story. Now, this was my first Ruth Ware novel, and I had heard really good things about this one. I think Ruth Ware had written 4 or 5 novels before this one, and everybody was saying that this was her best novel yet, and I have since read one Ruth Ware, and I will say, still, again, I enjoyed The Turn of the Key better. This was so good. This had that addictive quality that you want from a mystery thriller. And I know that a lot of people thought that the letter writing element kind of messed with the pacing and they didn't enjoy it. I loved it. Half the time I forgot that I was reading it in a letter format until Rowan would talk to the attorney within the letter. She'd be in the middle of her story and then she would say, oh, but this is where it turns. And she would actually talk to this attorney within the letter, which I thought was really cool. And it drew me back out and was like, oh yeah, this is her writing a letter. I don't know. I just thought it was really well done. This book was spooky and eerie and creepy and thrilling and just everything that I wanted. Twists and turns, just everything that you want from a mystery thriller. I absolutely adored it. This was one that I actually read it in physical format, which you guys know I don't do that a ton, but I read it physically, and I actually, the day that I finished it, was leaving to go on a trip, and I wanted to return it to the library before we left, and I was sitting there literally minutes before we were leaving going, just let me finish it so that I can give it back. Oh, it was so good. It was so good. If you haven't read this one yet, even if you haven't liked other Ruth Ware books in the past, try this one. Just pick it up. It's good. All right, we got 4 more to talk about. The next one I have to mention is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. Now, I'm not going to give a huge synopsis on this because I don't want to give anything away, but I will just say that it is a Beauty and the Beast retelling that follows our main characters, Prince Ren and Harper. Now, this is another one that I didn't have any expectations going in, really. I'd heard a lot of good things, but I just wanted to go into it with an open mind, and I highly enjoyed this. I haven't read a good fairy tale retelling in a long time before this, and this was exactly what I needed. We have a mixture of the fairy tale world versus the real world. Harper, who is our female main character, lives in Washington, D.C., and she actually winds up going into Prince Ren's world, and it was really cool to see the real life elements versus the fantasy. I really enjoyed that. I loved seeing these characters together. There is also diversity in this novel, as Harper has cerebral palsy. I thought that added a really nice element into the book. Again, I'm not a known voices reviewer, but I did enjoy the presence of that in the novel. It was completely action-packed. The battle scenes were really cool. This is one that I just kept reading over and over and over. It's almost 500 pages long, and I finished it in a weekend, which never happens for me. It was so good. The ending, that plot twist, just made it everything that I wanted it to be. I will also say I've already read the sequel, and it was really good too. So if you're looking for a new fantasy fairy tale retelling series, this is one to get on. Before we get into my top 2, I have one more that I want to talk about that I have not officially ranked, but you guys probably knew it was coming. I have to include Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Everybody and their mom has read this book by now. I'm not going to give a huge synopsis, but essentially this book takes place in an alternate America where after President Obama left office, the first female president was elected. Her son Alex, who is the first son of the United States, has a feud with Prince Henry of Wales. Alex's mom thinks that it looks bad for her re-election campaign if it looks like the two are having a feud, so they are made to act like they're friends, and they actually become friends, and then they actually become something more than that. Now, Red, White, and Royal Blue is one of those books that even before it was released, everybody was talking about it and talking about how great it was and how great it was going to be. And then it released in June, and I didn't have it, and I still didn't have it, and I didn't end up getting into it until December. And at that point, I was really scared because I had heard so many good things. I hadn't heard a single negative review, and I was really scared that my expectations were going to be too high. But no, this was just as good as everybody says. This is the softest shit that I've ever read in my life. I would die for Prince Henry. I need one of him in my life. Everybody in this novel was so good and well developed and well thought out. And the one thing that I really did enjoy about the story is obviously this is a romance. There's going to be a lot of romantic elements in this novel, and that's true. But we also learn a lot about politics, and we hear a lot about the inner workings of the government and how this re-election campaign is going on, and the British royalty, what's happening in their lives as far as just being royals. And it was so well rounded, and I really appreciated that. This, at the end of the day, this novel just filled me with hope. Because there's a lot of tough stuff going on in our lives right now, especially in America. We're going through a lot as far as our political environment. And this novel really gave me hope that one day we can live in a world like this novel portrays. So now we are down to the final 2 books of this video and my top 2 books of the year of 2019, and the only 2 books that I actually have a physical copy of. So my second favorite book of the year 2019 was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This novel is told in an interview style format, and we are following the band members of Daisy Jones and the Six. They were a popular band in the 1970s within this world, and we are learning about how they got together, their rise to fame, and why they broke up at the height of their careers. Now, I already mentioned in this video, I've read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by this same author and really enjoyed it as well. And I have read a third novel of hers also, but this one has to take the cake. I listened to this one on audiobook, which is 100% what I would recommend doing. It is made with a full cast, and it is so well done. It, just like with Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, it's really hard for me to believe that Daisy Jones and the Six were not an actual band. I want to know more about them. I want their music. I want everything that they are to be real, because I just couldn't get enough. I will also say, never in my life have I wanted to reread a book as soon as I put it down until I read this. This novel just drew me into this world. I wanted simultaneously to get to the end and see what happened, and also to savor my time with these characters. All the characters in this book are so flawed. There's times that you root for them and times that you completely disagree with them, but regardless, you are attached and you love them, and there is just so much going on in here, and it just takes you on such a journey. This is a masterpiece. This is a phenomenal piece of literature. And well, I said earlier that The Great Alone was my favorite historical fiction of the year. This, I guess, technically is my favorite historical fiction of the year because it is, if you want to be technical, it's set in present day because the interviews are happening in present day, but all the information is happening in the 1970s. So place that where you will. But regardless, this is one that I feel like has been on a lot of people's list this year also, but if you haven't picked it up yet, please do. It is just as good as everyone says. And the last book that I'm going to talk about today, my favorite book of 2019, you guys already probably know what it is. My favorite book of all time has to be With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. With the Fire on High follows our main character, Amani, who is in high school. She is a teen mom and she's living with her grandmother. They're trying to make ends meet. Amani is trying to figure out how to raise her daughter while also creating a life for herself. And her real passion is cooking. She absolutely loves to cook. And through her culinary class at her school, she winds up getting the opportunity to go on an excursion to Spain, and it completely changes everything for her. Now, I also read The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo this year, and I highly enjoyed that one as well. That book is told in verse. This book is just told in prose, and both of them have Elizabeth Acevedo's signature writing style. She is such a talented writer. I listened to this one on audio as well, and it is narrated by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I loved hearing the story come to life through her narration. You can just tell that every word that she puts on the page is expertly placed, and she takes time to craft exactly how she wants everything to sound, and it just spoke to me. Obviously, there is a ton of diversity in this novel, and one of the things that I appreciated the most about this novel is that Amani is in high school. She's 17 or 18, I think, and I am 24, so there's a little bit of an age gap here. Amani became a mom her freshman year of high school. I did not become a mom until I was 22 years old. So I was not a teen mom, but I was a young mom. And I have never felt seen as a young mom in any novel, any piece of literature that I've ever read until I picked this up. There is so much about being a mom that you don't know until it happens to you. And this novel touched that part of me that nothing else has ever come close to speaking to. I'm like getting emotional just even thinking about it, but everything about this novel was so good. The characters are really well developed. Amani on her own stands so strong, and yet she works so well with all the rest of the other characters. They all stand on their own, but they all weave together so beautifully. The story itself is paced really well. It's so atmospheric, and it just pulls you in, and just, it's everything that you could ever want from a YA contemporary. There are heartbreaking moments, and there are incredible, heart-lifting, you're just rooting for everybody. It's so good. And this is one that, again, I feel like a lot of people have read, but I just want everybody to read this. I truly do think no matter what age you are, no matter what you like to read, you will find something to relate to in this novel. So if you have not given it a chance yet, I'm imploring you, please go and pick this up because it is my favorite book of all time. So that is it for my favorite books of 2019. If you have read any of the books that I talked about today, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what you thought, and let me know what your favorite book of 2019 was. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to go down and give it a big thumbs up, as well as hitting the subscribe button and the bell icon down below so that you never miss out on any of my content. So until next time, bye!